Thank you for the focus and the effort that you will put into today's grammar lesson. By the end of this lesson, I have a few takeaways. I would like for you to be able to describe a subject, a verb, a complete sentence, an independent clause, a dependent clause, a fragment, run-on, simple sentence, complex sentence, coordinating conjunctions, subordinating conjunctions, and relative pronouns. Let's start with complete sentences. All sentences must begin with a capital letter, end with punctuation, express a complete thought, and have both a subject and a verb. Fragments. A sentence fragment is an incomplete sentence that cannot stand by itself. Fragments are either missing a subject, a verb, or a complete thought. What is a verb? Verbs are action words. A verb can express a physical action, such as she texted her friend. Verbs can express a mental action, such as she thought about her friend. Remember, though, that a verb can also express a state of being. She is a good friend. The word is a state of being verb. Sentence fragments. Let's look at some examples of sentence fragments that are missing a verb. The girl sitting in the window staring at the hot air balloons floating by above. While the reader is confused, this is a fragment. It is an incomplete thought. It's missing a verb. It has the subject, but to revise it, the writer needs to add a verb, such as is. The girl is sitting. The maple trees with the shaking leaves. Well, what about them? This is a fragment. The reader is confused. You should revise and add a verb. It's missing a verb. Perhaps you say something like the maple trees with the shaking leaves swayed in the wind. What is a subject? The subject of a sentence is the person, place, thing, or idea that is doing or being something. To find the subject, locate the verb and ask the question, who or what, to the verb. And that's your subject. For example, she texted her friend. Well, who is texting? She. So she is the subject of your sentence. Sentence fragments. Let's look at these examples of sentence fragments that are missing a subject. And laughed loudly enough to make everyone in the movie turn around. Well, again, the reader is confused. This is an incomplete thought. It is missing a subject. Who was laughing loudly? So even if you just add the pronoun he laughed loudly enough to make everyone in the movie turn around. Now you have a complete thought. Shot through the sky like a bullet. What did? The reader is confused. The writer has left out the subject. So revise by adding something perhaps like the rocket shot through the sky like a bullet. Clause. A clause is a group of words that contains at least one subject and one verb. Independent clause. An independent clause is a complete sentence that can stand by itself. It has a subject and verb, makes sense by itself, and it expresses a complete thought. Think of it this way. An independent person is one who can solve problems on his own, take care of his own needs, stand on his own 2 feet. An independent clause is one that can stand on its own 2 feet too. You can join independent clauses if you want to. This is called coordination. Let's talk about run-ons. A run-on is a sentence in which 2 or more independent clauses are joined without the proper punctuation. For example, I went to the store, he stayed at home. Here we have 2 complete independent clauses, but it is considered a run-on because it is missing the proper punctuation. Here's another. My parents bought me a new laptop. They said it was a gift for my good grades. So the thought just seems to run on. This is one independent clause. It makes sense all by itself. It can stand on its own. This is another independent clause. But it is not correct. It is considered a run-on. This is another way to revise a run-on by using a coordinating conjunction to join the two independent clauses. You could say, my parents bought me a new laptop and they said it was a gift for my good grades. Now we have written a complete sentence. Dependent clause. A dependent clause is a group of words that also contains a subject and a verb, but it does not express a complete thought. It cannot stand alone. It is not a sentence. Think of it this way. A dependent person is one who needs help from another, a more independent person. A dependent person needs to lean on someone stronger. Well, a dependent clause is one that cannot stand on its two own feet. It needs an independent clause to lean on. You must join a dependent clause to an independent one. This is called subordination. Here are a list of subordinating conjunctions that begin a dependent clause. When you join a dependent clause to an independent clause, you are not joining equals. One side of the resulting sentence, the independent clause, is stronger, and the other side, the dependent clause, is weaker or subordinate. The words used to join unequal pairs of clauses are called those subordinating conjunctions. When you join a dependent clause to an independent clause, you create a complex sentence. How do you punctuate that? When the main clause appears at the beginning of a sentence, you do not need a comma. When the subordinate clause appears at the beginning of a sentence, then you need a comma. Remember, subordinate clauses, that's just another way of saying dependent clauses. Subordinate clauses begin with subordinating conjunctions, or they can also begin with relative pronouns. The relative pronouns are who, whom, whose, which, and that. Relative pronouns introduce subordinate clauses functioning as adjectives. To punctuate, you use commas to set off non-restrictive or non-essential subordinate clauses, and do not use commas to set off restrictive or essential clauses. A relative pronoun is a pronoun that introduces a relative clause, but why is it called relative? It is called a relative pronoun because it relates to the word that its relative clause modifies. Here's an example. The person who phoned me last night is my teacher. In the example, who relates to the person, which who phoned me last night modifies. It introduces the relative clause, who phoned me last night. Again, punctuation rules. You use commas to set off non-restrictive elements. Do not use commas to set off restrictive elements. A restrictive essential element defines or limits the meaning of the word it modifies and is therefore essential to the meaning of the sentence. Because it contains essential information, a restrictive element is not set off with commas. Why should you care about all of this? If you learn to distinguish independent from dependent clauses and recognize subordinating conjunctions and relative pronouns, you will be more apt to avoid some common fragment and punctuation errors in your writing. You will craft a variety of sentence types correctly. So, go use your knowledge of these terms to help you be a better writer and a better communicator.